The frozen planet and the unexpected visitor. The wind screamed like a wild beast. Captain John Tracer held his breath as the shuttle broke through the clouds. Below him was a planet covered in white ice. No trees, no cities, just endless cold. His hand shook as he tried to steer, but the engines were dying. Sparks flew. Alarms blared. "This is bad," he muttered. The shuttle crashed. Snow exploded everywhere. Metal groaned and bent. Then silence. John opened his eyes. Blood ran down his forehead. He was alive, but stuck. The door was frozen shut. The heater was broken. He only had minutes before the cold would take him. His breath turned into white clouds. He tried to move, but everything hurt. Then something strange happened. A soft light appeared outside the cracked window. It wasn't a rescue drone. It wasn't fire. It was someone. A tall figure moved through the snow, wrapped in glowing blue fabric. The shape came closer, step by step, not sinking into the ice like a normal person would. John blinked, confused. Was it real, or just a dream? The door opened with a hiss. Cold air rushed in. John gasped. The figure stepped into the shuttle. It was a woman, or something like a woman. Her skin shimmered like frost. Her long silver hair floated slightly, as if the air itself was lighter around her. Her eyes glowed with a soft golden light. She kneeled beside him. "You carry warmth," she whispered. "I need it." John's lips moved, but no sound came. Then darkness. When John woke up, he was lying on a smooth bed made of crystal. The air around him was warmer, still cold, but not deadly. He sat up slowly. He was inside a glowing cave. Light came from the walls. Strange, glowing plants pulsed with color. In front of him stood the alien woman. "You're awake," she said. John stared. "Who? What are you?" "I am Lyra," she said simply. John rubbed his forehead. "Where am I?" "My refuge, beneath the ice." He looked around. "You saved me." Lyra nodded. "Yes, I felt your warmth from far away. My people cannot survive this freeze much longer. But you burn." "I think you mean body heat," John said, still confused. "I'm human. We're warm-blooded. That's all." Lyra tilted her head. "It is more than heat. There is something else inside you." She stepped closer. John noticed the ice didn't form near her feet. Wherever she walked, frost melted just a little. "You didn't crash by mistake," she said. "What do you mean?" "You were brought here. This planet calls for warmth. The cold is growing stronger. My kind, we are fading." John shook his head. "No way. I was on a scouting mission. Engine failed. I just crashed." Lyra smiled softly. "Or maybe the planet chose you." John laughed, but it came out shaky. He didn't believe in fate or magic. He believed in machines, data, and science. Still, something about this place felt strange. "I need to fix my shuttle," he said. "You cannot leave. Not now. A storm is coming. A storm that will bury this world for 10 years. John stared at her. "What?" "The freeze is alive," she whispered, "and it hates warmth." Suddenly, the cave shook. Ice cracked in the distance. The glowing plants dimmed for a moment, then lit up again. Lyra looked frightened. "It's starting," she said. "We must stay close. I cannot survive alone." John felt uneasy. "What do you mean, stay close?" She reached out and gently touched his arm. Her hand was cold, so cold it made him flinch. But then, it changed. Warmth rushed into her fingers. Her eyes widened. "You see," she said, "your warmth feeds me." John stepped back. "Whoa, that's weird." Lyra lowered her hand. "You are afraid. I understand." "I'm not afraid," John lied. "Just confused." She nodded. "I will not force you, but if we don't stay near each other, I will freeze. And if I freeze, so will you. John looked at the cave walls. Snow was already piling near the entrance. Wind howled louder outside. His hands were still numb, his body still weak. He sighed. All right, we'll stay here. For now. Lyra smiled. Good. She walked over to a strange seat made of glowing stone and sat down, folding her legs under her. John sat too, still watching her. She looked at him with soft eyes. Thank you, human. You are the first warmth I've felt in many years. John swallowed hard. He didn't know what she meant by warmth. He didn't know why his crash led him here, or why this alien seemed so desperate. But something told him this was just the beginning. A dangerous bond begins. John sat near the glowing walls, his back against the crystal surface that pulsed faintly with warmth. The silence in the cave was deep, only broken by the distant sound of wind howling like wolves trapped in ice. Lyra sat across from him, her silver hair glowing in the light, her eyes fixed on him with quiet curiosity. She hadn't moved much, but John could tell she was studying him carefully, like a scientist watching something rare and fragile. How long have you been down here? He asked, breaking the silence. Lyra's gaze softened. A long time. I was born beneath the ice. My people lived in great towers once, before the great freeze came. John frowned. What caused it? She looked away. We did. Our hearts grew cold long before the planet did. We forgot warmth, both outside and within. Now we hide, scattered in caves, afraid of something we can no longer understand. John looked at her, unsure. And you think I have something your people lost? Lyra nodded. I know you do. When I touched you, something inside me stirred. I felt alive. John shifted uncomfortably. Maybe you just needed body heat. No, she said softly. It's more than heat. It's emotion. It's energy. You humans carry a different kind of warmth. Not just in your skin, but in your spirit. John rubbed his face, not sure if this was real or just a weird dream brought on by a head injury. But he couldn't deny what he felt. The air around her seemed to react when she moved. The walls brightened when she was calm, dimmed when she looked sad. You said we need to stay close, John said. How close are we talking? Lyra didn't answer. Instead, she slowly moved toward him. As she sat beside him, barely a breath away, John felt a strange pull, like a current of warmth flowing from his chest into hers. Her hand brushed his, and a soft glow formed where they touched. John gasped. His skin tingled. But it wasn't pain, it felt like connection. I don't understand this, he said, voice low. You're not meant to, she whispered. Not yet. The cave pulsed brighter, and John could swear he heard something, like a deep hum from far below, as if the planet itself was waking. Lyra's face turned serious. My people will feel this bond, she said. They will sense it, and they will not be pleased. Why? John asked. What's wrong with helping someone? Lyra stood and walked to the far side of the cave, touching the glowing wall. A ripple of light spread from her hand, revealing carvings John hadn't seen before. Ancient symbols, and a figure drawn like a man, surrounded by flames. There is an old story, she said, of the Warm One, a being who comes from the stars and awakens the fire in our kind. Not everyone believes it. Many fear it. They say warmth brings chaos. Emotion leads to ruin. But what if it brings life? John asked. She turned to him, her eyes full of hope and sadness. Then we must protect it, even from my own people. The words chilled him more than the wind outside. He wasn't just a lost human anymore. He had become part of something strange and ancient, something dangerous. Suddenly, the cave shook. A gust of snow blasted through the entrance, and Lyra stumbled. John ran to her and caught her before she fell. The moment their bodies touched, the glow around them flared like a small sun. Her breathing steadied. She looked up at him, her face inches from his. "You are stronger than you know." John held her a little tighter. "And you're colder than you let on." She smiled for the first time. "That's why I need your warmth." As the cave settled, John realized the truth. This bond was more than survival. It was changing him too. He could feel his heart beating stronger, his senses sharper, his thoughts deeper. He didn't know what was happening, but whatever it was real. He looked at Lyra and saw something more than an alien. He saw someone lost, someone hurting, someone who had waited a long time in the dark for him. And deep down, something told him this was only the beginning. The ancient prophecy. The light from the crystals grew dimmer with each hour. John noticed it first, not through vision, but feeling. The warmth around him was slowly thinning, like breath in winter air. Lyra sat quietly near the cave wall, eyes closed, her body curled inward as if she were trying to hold something inside. The connection between them was still there, but weaker now, as if something outside was pulling it away. "I think the storm's getting stronger," John said quietly. Lyra opened her eyes. Her voice came out softer than before. "It is. And the cold is not just weather here. It's alive. It watches us." John frowned. "The cold watches us." She stood, her hands brushing the wall gently. "It's what we believe. When our ancestors shut their hearts and gave up warmth, the cold became more than nature. It became a punishment, a force that grows stronger when we grow colder inside." John didn't know what to say. He was a man of science, a trained explorer, but this planet was different. The rules felt twisted, strange. There was something more alive here than sensors could pick up, something that watched without eyes. Lyra motioned to him. "Come, there is something I must show you." They walked through the cave, deeper than John thought possible. The tunnel sloped downward, and soon the air grew warmer, not in temperature, but in feeling, like stepping into memories. The walls were lined with glowing vines, their light soft and golden. The deeper they went, the quieter everything became. The wind could no longer be heard. Time seemed to slow. Finally, they entered a vast underground chamber. John stopped in awe. The room was massive, easily the size of a stadium. But what struck him most were the walls. Every inch was carved with images, symbols, and stories. Strange alien figures with elongated limbs, stars above their heads, and most shocking of all, humans, or at least beings that looked very much like humans. He stepped closer. This is ancient." Lyra nodded. "Older than memory." John touched a carving of a man, his body surrounded by flame-like symbols. Beside him stood one of Lyra's kind, her hand over her heart, her body glowing. That's a human. We called him the first warm one," Lyra said. "He came from the stars, not through ships or machines, but through light. At least, that's how the story goes." John traced the lines of the carving, his fingers tingling as he did. "Why is he here?" "Because," she said, "he gave us warmth. Once, a long time ago. And then, he vanished. Some say he burned away. Others say we drove him out. Either way, after he left, the great freeze came." John turned to her. "You think I'm like him?" Lyra stepped beside him. "I don't think. I feel it. The moment I touched you, something woke up inside this cave. You made the lights return. You made the silence break. You lit the fire in me again." John looked around. The carvings did feel familiar, somehow. The shapes, the energy, like dreams he never remembered having. "But why me?" he whispered. Lyra didn't answer. Instead, she led him to the center of the chamber. There stood a pedestal carved from deep blue stone. On it lay a small flat disc. As John stepped closer, the disc lit up with a soft golden light and began to hum. John froze. The hum wasn't just sound, it was a song, a melody, one he didn't recognize but somehow understood. a song of sorrow and hope, of fire and frost. It sang not in words, but in feelings. Lyra whispered, "Only one who carries true warmth can awaken the song of fire." John felt his heart racing. "I didn't mean to. I just walked up to it." "That's how it always happens," she said. "You didn't come here to be a hero. But maybe the planet brought you for something greater." As the melody faded, John felt a sharp pain in his chest. Not physical, but deep. A fear. A warning. "What if I'm not ready?" he asked. Lyra looked at him, her expression suddenly serious. "Then the cold will win, and this planet will sleep forever." They stood in silence, both staring at the ancient carvings glowing gently under the flickering lights. But then, the chamber trembled. Dust fell from the ceiling. A gust of icy wind blew in from the tunnel behind them. Lyra turned sharply. "They've found us." "Who?" John asked. "My people," she said, voice tense. "The guardians of the freeze. They've sensed the bond between us. They will see it as a threat." John's fists clenched. "They'll hurt you. They'll try to separate us, break the warmth before it spreads." John looked back at the carvings. The first warm one. The fire. The prophecy. "I won't let them," he said. Lyra looked at him with a strange expression, half fear, half wonder. "Then you must run, but not alone. This bond, it's no longer just survival. It's change." She grabbed his hand. The glow between their palms returned, stronger than ever. And for the first time since crashing on this frozen planet, John wasn't afraid of the cold. Hunted in the ice. The glow faded behind them as John and Lyra fled the ancient chamber, their steps echoing through the ice-worn tunnels. The melody of the Song of Fire still clung to John's chest like a fading ember, but the warmth it brought was quickly being chased by fear. They were no longer safe in that sacred place. The storm was no longer the danger. It was the people who called this frozen planet home. Lyra's people. "They won't hurt you, will they?" John asked, breathing heavily as they moved through narrow ice corridors. Lyra's face was pale. "Not if I obey. But if they see us together, touching, glowing like this, they will know what we've become. And they will act." "Become?" John asked, frowning. "We're just surviving." "No," she said without looking at him. "We're changing. You're changing me. And that scares them more than death." John didn't fully understand, but the way her hand squeezed his told him everything. This wasn't just a bond of warmth now. It was something deeper, something dangerous, something sacred. His body still hummed with the strange energy they shared, and he could feel it pulling him closer to her, guiding them through the tunnels as if the planet itself remembered his steps. Behind them, the wind had changed. It no longer howled like a storm. It whispered. Whispers of disapproval, of anger, of cold. John looked back once and saw faint blue lights blinking far in the distance. Eyes, perhaps, or machines, or both. "They're getting closer," he said. Lyra nodded. "We need to reach the deep hollows. There's a hidden path, but it's dangerous. If the cold touches you there, it won't just freeze your skin. It will try to freeze your soul." John gave her a dry look. "That's comforting." Still, they pushed forward. The walls began to close in. The path narrowed into a jagged crawlspace, sharp icicles hanging like fangs from the ceiling. They crawled, shoulder to shoulder, while the frost around them thickened like living vines. Lyra moved fast, guided by memory, her fingers brushing symbols hidden in the ice. Each symbol responded with a glow, revealing the way. Then, a loud crack echoed through the tunnel. A flash of movement behind them. John turned just in time to see a figure drop from the ceiling. Tall, cloaked in frost-blue armor, with glowing white eyes and skin like frozen glass. He didn't speak. He simply raised his arm and pointed at John. "The human must be taken," he said in a voice that sounded like wind scraping rock. More shapes appeared behind him. 3, maybe 4, all moving with eerie calmness, unaffected by the cold, untouched by the fear John felt building in his chest. "Go," Lyra shouted, pushing John ahead. "That one is Kareth. He leads the Frost Guard." John slipped into the deeper tunnel, his heart pounding. "You didn't say we were dealing with warriors." "They are more than warriors," she said, pulling a crystal from her waist and smashing it against the wall. The tunnel behind them cracked, then collapsed with a burst of snow and stone. The path was sealed, for now. They kept moving, the tunnels twisting like the veins of a frozen beast. As they ran, John's skin began to itch. The cold here wasn't natural. It crept into his thoughts, whispered doubts in his ears. "You will melt. You will break her. You are wrong here." He stumbled, grabbing his head. Lyra caught him, holding his face gently. "Don't listen. The deep hollows test your soul. The cold wants to divide us." "I can feel it," John whispered. It's like it's inside my blood." "That's how we lived for generations," she said sadly. "Frozen, silent, afraid of feeling. You understand now what it does to us." John nodded, breathing through it. He reached for her hand again, and as their skin touched, the darkness faded, just a little. "Keep going," she said. "We're close." They came to a large cavern, round and smooth like a great bowl carved from ice. At the center stood a platform covered in old symbols, the same ones John had seen in the temple. "This is a transfer gate," Lyra said. "Ancient technology. It will take us to the hidden side of the mountain." "How does it work?" "With trust," she said. She stepped onto the platform and reached out for him. John followed, taking her hand. Their bond flared again, strong, bright, like fire dancing between them. The ice underfoot cracked. The entire cavern began to shake. Then a voice rang out. "You shame us, daughter." John turned, eyes wide. Standing across the cavern was a tall woman, similar to Lyra but older. Her eyes were cold. Her robe shimmered like the edge of a glacier. Behind her stood the Frost Guard, led by Kareth, who watched silently. "Mother," Lyra breathed. "You would join with him?" the older woman asked. "An outsider? A warm one? You bring ruin to our kind." "I bring hope," Lyra said, her voice trembling but strong. "The cold has taken too much. I choose warmth." The older woman raised her hand, and the ice around them began to rise, sharp, jagged spikes aiming for John. But John stepped forward. "You're afraid," he said simply, "afraid that your world is changing. That warmth will break your rules." But Lyra isn't broken. She's alive. And maybe it's time your people remember what that feels like. The ice paused. Kareth looked at the older woman. "He speaks with fire, like the one in the old stories." The woman's face twitched. For the first time, doubt cracked through her mask of control. Lyra gripped John's hand tighter. The platform beneath them glowed, bright as a sunrise. And in a flash of golden light, they vanished. The frozen temple of fire. When the blinding light faded, John staggered forward, his boots crunching against unfamiliar ground. The air was different here, warmer, heavier, almost alive. A golden mist drifted across the stone floor, rising from beneath strange cracks in the ice that didn't feel cold at all. They stood at the edge of a vast cavern, far deeper than any John had seen before. Above them, the ceiling curved like a frozen sky painted with glowing constellations. But here, instead of stars, the ceiling was lit by hundreds of fire orbs, floating gently in the air, dancing like tiny suns. John turned slowly in place. "Where are we?" Lyra stepped forward, her voice barely a whisper. "The Temple of Fire. The first warmth. The final flame." John followed her gaze to the center of the cavern. There stood a tall structure, like a tower of stone and glass, pulsing with soft red light. It looked ancient but alive, almost breathing. A wide staircase led up to an altar at the top, where a flame floated in midair, never touching the stone, burning without smoke, heat, or sound. Lyra's voice shook. This is the last place the first warm one stood before he vanished. John walked slowly toward the structure. The moment his foot touched the first stair, the flame pulsed brighter. The fire knew him. He looked back at Lyra. What do I do? She hesitated, her silver eyes filled with fear and hope. You listen. So John climbed. Each step felt heavier than the last, not because of the weight, but because of something deeper. The higher he went, the more he felt his chest tighten, his breath shorten. Memories came flooding back, not his own, but visions. He saw a figure made of light walking beside Lyra's ancestors. He saw warmth spreading across cities of ice, turning walls into rivers of color. He saw fear, elders turning away, building barriers, locking away their hearts. He saw war, and then silence. John reached the top and stood before the floating flame. It was beautiful. It didn't flicker. It swirled, like a living dance of golden and crimson. He could feel it pulling something from deep inside him. Not just heat, not just life, but intention, meaning. Behind him, Lyra climbed slowly, her hands pressed together like she was praying. She joined him, eyes locked on the flame. This is the heart of our world, she said. The planet's soul. It sleeps, waiting for someone to wake it. Someone with warmth. John looked at her, confused. Why me? Why does it respond to me? Because you're not afraid to feel, she said. You're not afraid to burn. He reached his hand out slowly toward the flame. As he did, a voice, not from outside, but inside his own mind, echoed through him. Warmth is not given. It is shared. To awaken the fire, you must give part of your own. John pulled his hand back, heart racing. What does that mean? Lyra stepped closer. To awaken it fully, you must transfer your life energy. Your soul will fuel the fire. And in return, the world will be reborn. John's heart sank. So I have to die. No, Lyra said quickly. You must give. But giving doesn't always mean ending. Sometimes it means transforming. He stared into the flame. And if I don't? Lyra turned her face to the glowing orbs above. The cold will consume the last of our kind. The cities will collapse. The planet will go silent. Forever. Silence fell between them. John thought of Earth, of his mission, of the rules he had always followed. But none of that mattered now. This planet had pulled him in for a reason. This bond with Lyra, it wasn't chance. It was calling. He took a deep breath. Tell me what to do. Lyra's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Step into the flame. Give it your warmth, your memory, your fear, your love. He turned to her. If I don't come back. You will, she said softly. Because you are not just human anymore. With one last look, John stepped into the flame. The world around him vanished. There was no pain, only sensation, a rush of everything he had ever felt. Joy, sadness, love, anger, hope. The warmth inside him wasn't just heat, it was the story of being alive. Every moment, every memory, every choice burned through the fire, feeding it. The flame grew larger, swirling around him like a cloak. He felt his body break apart, not in death, but in understanding. He wasn't losing himself. He was becoming more. Images filled the fire. Lyra as a child, cold and alone. The first warm one looking back as he faded. The planet itself, covered in layers of frost, waiting for someone to feel enough to thaw it. And then light. Pure, endless light. When John opened his eyes again, he was still standing. But everything had changed. The flame was no longer separate from him. It was inside him. His skin glowed faintly, his eyes burned with golden fire, and every breath he took melted the frost beneath his feet. Lyra stepped back, eyes wide. John, you've become the fire. He looked at his hands, trembling. I feel everything, every heartbeat, every sorrow, every joy. Not just mine, everyone's. From deep within the cavern, a low hum began to rise. The orbs above turned orange and began to swirl faster. The entire temple shook, but this time it wasn't fear. It was life returning. John turned to Lyra. It's time. We're going to thaw this world. She nodded, stepping beside him, taking his hand. And for the first time in 1,000 years, the frozen heart of the planet began to beat again. Sacrifice and rebirth. The ground beneath them pulsed like a living heart. The flames that once floated quietly in the temple of fire now spiraled around the chamber in wide arcs of golden light. Every stone, every crack in the wall, every frozen surface began to drip, shimmer, and shift. The cold was not retreating, it was resisting. A final storm of frost, desperate not to be forgotten. John stood tall in the center of the temple, his skin glowing with a gentle flame that didn't burn but radiated. It was not fire like Earth knew. It was warmth in its truest form, spirit, memory, and love made visible. Around him, the temple's machinery began to wake. Ancient rings turned. Light spilled from cracks long sealed. The heart of the planet had begun to stir. But with it came pain. The warmth burned away the walls John had always kept around his heart. Every memory surged forward like water behind a broken dam. He remembered his father's silent hugs, his mother's laughter in the kitchen, the heartbreak he never healed from, the loneliness of space, the wonder of meeting Lyra. It all came back, raw and real, and it hurt. He fell to his knees. Lyra rushed to him, kneeling by his side, her silver hands reaching for his face. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice breaking. John gritted his teeth. "It's too much. I can feel everything. Not just mine. Yours, this planet's, the memories of 1,000 years." Lyra closed her eyes, leaning her forehead gently against his. "Let me carry it with you." Their bond flared, stronger than ever. The warmth spread between them like a wave, a perfect circle of light pushing back the shadows. But just beyond the temple walls, they could feel it. Something cold, ancient, and full of rage. The last breath of the freeze was coming for them. The final test. John stood slowly, breath shaking. The fire isn't enough. The planet is waking up, but it's afraid. It remembers what warmth once did. The war. The loss. It needs to see we're not here to take. We're here to give. Lyra looked at him, realization dawning. "You have to give it everything." He nodded. "I have to make the final sacrifice." "No," she said quickly, gripping his arm. "There has to be another way. We've come so far. Don't leave me." He looked into her eyes, and for the first time, he truly understood what she meant by needing warmth. It wasn't just heat or survival. It was love. Connection. The spark that made a soul feel alive in the coldest places. "I'm not leaving," he said softly. "I'm becoming part of this world." He turned toward the altar again, where the great flame hovered, brighter now, spinning faster with urgency. Lyra watched him walk away from her, each step heavier than the last. She wanted to call him back, to stop him, but something inside her whispered not to. This was not his end. This was his purpose. John reached the flame. He opened his arms. He closed his eyes. And he gave. Not just his energy or body, but everything. His memories, his kindness, his hope, his human spirit. The flame accepted it all. And for one perfect moment, time stopped. A light brighter than anything before exploded through the cavern. It poured out through tunnels, caves, mountains, and valleys. It melted the ancient ice, not with destruction, but with forgiveness. Entire cities frozen in time began to blink back to life. The sleeping hearts of Lyra's people stirred in their hiding places. They felt it, a pulse, a call, a warmth not felt in generations. And at the center of it all, silence. Then, breath. John opened his eyes. He was still standing, still human, but changed. The fire had not taken his life. It had merged with it. He was no longer a visitor. He was a guardian, part human, part flame. His body was strong, but no longer bound by heat or cold. He had become the balance, the bridge between two worlds. Lyra ran to him, her face filled with tears and joy. She touched his face gently, afraid he would vanish like the warm one from legend. But he didn't. His hand touched hers, and together, they glowed, not as two beings, but as one. The temple was still. The planet breathed. And far in the distance, beyond the horizon, the frost guard watched. The old rulers saw the sky change color, from blue to gold, and in their silence, they understood. The world had chosen rebirth. Hours later, as the first alien sun rose over the thawing cliffs, John and Lyra stood at the edge of a mountain, overlooking a land that once lay buried under centuries of snow. Rivers ran again. Crystal flowers opened their petals to the sky. The world was waking up. John took a deep breath. I can still feel it, the warmth, like it's alive in everything now. Lyra nodded. You gave the world hope again. He looked at her with a tired smile. So did you. I just lit the flame. You carried it through the dark. They stood quietly for a long time, listening to the sounds of a world rediscovering itself. Birds returning, wind carrying music instead of fear, and in the distance, the hum of cities no longer hiding underground. I don't think I can go back, John said. Lyra looked at him. Would you want to? He shook his head. No, not anymore. I think I belong here now. She smiled. Then stay and help build a new world, one where warmth isn't feared, but shared. And together, with the fire in their hearts and the dawn at their backs, they stepped forward into a world reborn. The new dawn. Days passed like whispers. Time flowed gently now, like thawed rivers winding through once frozen lands. The storm was gone. The cold no longer ruled. The planet, once a sleeping body wrapped in silence, had begun to sing again. Flowers with translucent petals bloomed where frost once lay heavy. Cracked towers of Lyra's people now shimmered with new light, their spires stretching toward the twin suns above. Everywhere, warmth was returning, not just in the air, but in the hearts of those who had forgotten how to feel it. John stood on a ledge high above the valley, watching this new world unfold. The fire inside him no longer burned. It pulsed. It wasn't pain. It wasn't power. It was presence. A deep, steady connection to everything around him. He could feel the soil breathing beneath his feet, the roots stretching for the sun, the people waking with wonder and fear, slowly learning how to live again. Behind him, Lyra approached quietly. She wore a new robe, one made of old royal fabric, but reshaped, woven with glowing threads that hummed softly. She looked like a queen reborn, but her eyes held the same softness they always had, the same longing, the same courage. You've become the heart of this world, she said, her voice light like a breeze. John turned, a small smile on his lips. No, we have. This place, these people, they needed more than heat. They needed someone to believe warmth could exist again. That's what you gave them. Lyra joined him at the edge, gazing out at the horizon. Some still resist. There are whispers in the deep cities, elders who say this fire is unnatural. There will always be those who fear change, John said, even on Earth. But fear can't survive in sunlight. She nodded. And what of Earth? The question hung in the air like mist. John hadn't thought about Earth in days, maybe longer. It used to be all he thought about, returning home, finishing his mission, writing his report. But now, the idea of leaving this world, it felt like walking away from something he helped bring back to life. Your ship still rests beneath the northern ridge, Lyra said gently. You could repair it. Leave. Go home. John looked out at the valley again. Children with silver skin and glowing eyes played near a river that hadn't flowed in centuries. Laughter echoed through once dead stone. Lanterns of living flame floated through the sky like stars given wings. It was a world reborn. "This is my home now," John said softly. Lyra's eyes closed, just for a moment, as if releasing a breath she had held since they met. But then John added, "Still, I need to go back. Not to stay, but to tell them." Lyra turned to him, confused. "Tell who?" "Earth," John said. "Humanity. They think we're alone. They think fire only lives in machines and reactors. But it doesn't. It lives in hearts. If they knew that, if they saw what we built here, maybe their world could start healing too." Silence passed between them. Not cold, not empty, just full of meaning. "I'll return," he said. "I promise." Lyra stepped forward, taking his hand. "Then take a part of us with you." She placed a glowing stone in his palm, a crystal formed in the temple of fire, still warm with the memory of their bond. It pulsed gently, like a heartbeat. "This will keep you safe," she said. "It holds our light." John held it close. "And what about you?" Lyra smiled. "I'll wait. And while I do, I'll teach my people to feel again, to love, to build. So when you return, this world will be ready." 3 days later, John stood at the foot of the ridge where his broken ship lay hidden under layers of melted ice. It had taken damage in the crash, but the planet's strange energies, combined with Lyra's knowledge, had helped repair it. As he prepared for launch, small groups of her people gathered nearby, watching in silence, their eyes filled with something new: hope. Lyra was the last to arrive. She said nothing at first, only stood with him as he ran his hand over the hull. Finally, she leaned in and kissed his forehead. "You were never meant to fall here," she whispered, "but you were always meant to stay." John stepped back, his voice rough. "I'll be back." She nodded once. No tears, no begging, only belief. The engines roared to life. The ship rose slowly, like a phoenix lifting from ashes, carrying the warmth of an entire world inside one man's soul. 2 Earth months later, in a vast conference hall on Earth, filled with diplomats, scientists, and soldiers, John Tracer stood alone under the spotlight. His skin no longer glowed, but those who looked into his eyes saw something bright, a fire that couldn't be explained. He told them everything: about the ice planet, about Lyra, about the prophecy, about warmth, not just as energy, but as the very thing that holds life together. Most didn't believe him. Some mocked him. But a few listened, and that was enough. He gave the crystal to Earth's leaders. Let them study it, fear it, misunderstand it. But even as they debated, the warmth inside it began to spread, first through the lab, then through hearts. And far away, under twin suns, Lyra stood at the edge of a new city made of light and stone. Children ran through halls carved with human and alien symbols. Fires danced in gardens where nothing once grew. The world was alive. Every morning, she looked to the sky, waiting for the day she would see a ship falling from the clouds again. This time not by accident, but by choice. Because sometimes warmth returns. Not just once, but forever.